Have you ever thought sharing clothes with your best friend was just a harmless habit? I thought so too, until he showed up. One simple act, a small white bag of clothes, and suddenly a 6-year friendship was spiraling into chaos. What he did next, you won't believe it. I've known her for 6 years. 6 years of late-night conversations, shared secrets, and small rituals that no one outside our friendship could ever understand. But the one thing that defined us more than anything else was our habit of sharing clothes. It started in college. We were the same size, the same taste, and somehow we always seemed to pick the exact same style. If she bought a jacket, I'd try it on the next day. If I found a new pair of boots, she'd be slipping them on before I even had a chance to wear them. We didn't ask permission. We didn't think twice. It was just normal for us. Her apartment smelled faintly of vanilla and lavender when I first stepped inside that day. I could see the tiny cluster of shoes neatly arranged by the door, the soft sweaters folded on the shelves, each item having its own little place. It wasn't perfect, but it was cozier, lived in warmth that made me feel instantly at home. I remember those college days vividly, rummaging through her closet during late-night study sessions, giggling at outfits that were just a little too bold, trying on scarves and jackets as if we were auditioning for a fashion show for no audience but ourselves. I could always rely on her to pick out something that would perfectly suit me, and she trusted me to do the same. It wasn't just about clothes. We shared everything: our hopes, our fears, our little private worlds. That friendship became a sanctuary, a safe zone from the chaos of the outside world. And for 6 years, I never imagined it would be threatened by someone else. Then he appeared. At first it was subtle, a shadow in the background, standing too close during conversations, lingering just a moment too long when she laughed. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe he's just protective, I thought. But something in his presence made my stomach tighten. Something in the way he looked at me, or perhaps at set off alarms I couldn't ignore. He was tall, sharply dressed, with a smile that seemed charming at first glance. But the charm was deceptive. There was a cold precision in the way he observed, a sense that he was mapping every corner of her life and claiming it in silent, imperceptible ways. The first real sign of trouble came one afternoon when we had planned a coffee date. Just her and me, our usual little ritual. I had chosen a soft cream blouse she'd love, one of those delicate pieces we often borrowed from each other. I wanted it to be perfect, something that spoke of our history, our closeness. But when I arrived at her apartment, he was there, sitting on her sofa as if it were his own, an easy smile plastered across his face. I froze. My heart thumped in confusion and irritation. "I thought you said he wouldn't be here," I muttered, more to myself than to anyone else. She shrugged, a tiny flicker of guilt in her eyes. "I told him not to come, but he wanted to." And then he looked at me. That same smile, but this time there was something else in his eyes. "So, you two really share everything?" he asked. The words themselves weren't threatening, but the way he said them, the tilt of his head, the half-smile, the subtle curiosity, it made my skin crawl. "Yes, we do," I said, forcing a polite smile. She laughed, completely oblivious to the tension. She held up her boots, showing him as if to demonstrate our bond, completely unaware of how invasive his presence felt. After that, things changed. He began appearing more often, inserting himself into every detail of our routines. Sometimes he would rearrange the bookshelves, comment on what I was wearing, linger in the kitchen while I prepared a coffee. His presence was subtle, yet oppressive, like a shadow stretching into every corner of my space. One evening, I came by to return a small bag of clothes she had lent me. I had a spare key, a sign of the trust she had in me. I expected her to be out, but he was there, standing in the middle of her living room, completely at ease. Like I wasn't supposed to be there. "Hey," he said, smiling that same unnerving smile. "What's in the bag?" "Just her clothes," I said, my voice flat, careful. He stepped closer. "Mind if I check?" I blinked, startled. "No, you can't. They're hers." But he didn't move away. He just watched, testing me. I didn't back down. I left the bag in the middle of the room and walked out, my hands trembling, my heart racing. Hours later, she called. "Where's my bag?" "I can't find my dress for tonight." I explained exactly where I had left it. But I just knew that he had intervened. That help of his had crossed a line. And at that moment, I realized nothing would ever feel normal again. That friendship hour 6-year ritual of sharing, trusting, and laughing was under threat, and I had no idea how to stop him from encroaching further. The next few weeks were a blur of small, creeping invasions. At first, it was almost imperceptible. He would linger a little too long while she and I were laughing about something trivial, his eyes darting between us in a way that made my stomach tighten. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things, that perhaps he was simply being attentive or protective. But deep down, I knew it was something else, something calculated. One Thursday evening, she invited me over for what I thought would be a casual clothes swap, our usual ritual. I brought a few items I knew she would love, carefully folded, a sweater here, a blouse there, all in a small white bag I held by the straps. The bag was light, nothing precious or valuable, just part of our unspoken habit of sharing. I opened the door, expecting the apartment to be empty. I had arrived slightly early, hoping for a quiet hour to catch up and maybe enjoy a cup of tea before the chaos of the weekend hit. But there he was. He was standing by the kitchen counter, holding a coffee mug, leaning slightly as if he owned the space. My chest tightened. I tried to keep my voice even. "Hey," I said softly, setting the bag down near the doorway. He turned, smiling that same unsettling smile. "Hey," he said. "What's in the bag?" "Just her clothes," I muttered, keeping my gaze fixed on the floor. He took a step closer, tilting his head. "Mind if I see?" I swallowed, my throat dry. "They're hers." He didn't back away. Instead, he hovered near me, eyes flicking to the bag, then to my face, as if reading my reaction, testing my boundaries. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I set the bag down, stepped back, and decided it was best to leave it at that. She walked in a moment later, cheerful as always, completely oblivious to the tension that filled the room. "Hey, you're early," she said, setting down her own coffee mug. "Didn't expect you yet." I forced a smile. "Yeah, thought I'd get a head start." He gave me that same look again, slow, deliberate. A look that said, "I'm in control here, whether you like it or not." The next few days were worse. Every time I visited, he seemed to know where I would be standing, how I would move, where I would place a bag or an article of clothing. It was subtle, almost casual, but it left me constantly on edge. And he wasn't just observing, he was altering things, rearranging her books, moving shoes, shifting sweaters, all the little details that made her apartment feel like our shared space now felt invaded. Then came the day of the white bag incident. I had dropped by to return some clothes, just a few items, nothing extravagant. I had a spare key, and I thought she was out running errands. I quietly let myself in, expecting an empty apartment. But of course, he was there, in the living room, completely at ease. "Hey," he said, that smile stretching across his face like he owned the place. "What's in the bag?" "Her clothes," I replied, keeping my tone flat. He stepped closer, reaching toward the bag. "Mind if I check?" I instinctively stepped back. "No, they're hers. Please don't touch them." He laughed softly, a sound that sent a chill down my spine. "I'm just trying to help." I thought I could make things easier for her. I blinked. Help, by touching her things without asking. His smile faltered slightly, but the glint in his eye remained. "I'm just trying to save her time. That's all." I didn't argue. I left the bag in the middle of the room and walked out, my heart racing, hands shaking. Hours later, she called, panic in her voice. "Where's my bag? I need that dress for tonight." I explained exactly where I had left it, but my gut told me something had happened. Something had crossed the line, and I wasn't wrong. He had taken it, of course. Not maliciously, at least he claimed, but to wash it and save her time, only. He didn't follow any of the careful routines we had for handling delicate clothes. The sweater smelled overwhelmingly of detergent, the blouse damp and stiff. It was a small thing, perhaps, but to me it represented the first crack in the trust and intimacy that had defined our friendship for 6 years. When she texted me about it later, frustrated and apologetic at her own impatience, I tried to explain why it bothered me. Before I could finish, he snatched the phone from her hands. "You're paranoid, crazy, obsessed. Leave it alone," he said, his voice sharp, mocking. The words felt like physical blows. I ended the call, my chest tight, my mind spinning. It was in that moment I realized how much had changed. The apartment, once a sanctuary, felt hostile. The rituals, once comforting, were under siege. And my friend, oblivious to the true extent of his interference, was caught between loyalty to me and attachment to him. I kept returning to that white bag in my mind, over and over. It had been such a simple object, a trivial thing in any normal friendship. But in his hands, it became a weapon, a symbol of control, a reminder that nothing would ever be the same. I began to notice patterns. He would linger when I arrived, subtly directing our conversations. He would comment on the clothes I was wearing, sometimes with a smirk that made me question his intentions. Every little movement, every glance, seemed orchestrated to remind me that the friendship we had built was no longer untouchable, and with each passing day, I felt smaller, more cautious. The warmth and trust that had defined our bond now existed in a fragile state, constantly tested by the presence of someone who didn't belong, yet insisted he did. By the end of that week, I realized something profound and terrifying. He wasn't going away. He wasn't just visiting or passing through. He had planted himself firmly in the space we had once shared freely. And with each act of help, he chipped away at the foundation of our friendship. The fear wasn't just about him or his actions. It was about the uncertainty, the lack of control. It was the creeping suspicion that no matter what I did, the dynamic of our friendship, the shared comfort we had cultivated over 6 years, could be permanently altered by his interference, and that fear, that was the start of something I couldn't yet name. Asterisk. The hours after I left her apartment that evening dragged like they had their own weight. Every time my phone vibrated, I jumped, expecting it to be her. And it was. "Where's my bag?" she asked, her voice tight with frustration. "I can't find my dress for tonight." "I need it for asterisk." I tried to stay calm. "I left it on the floor near the entrance." "By the coat rack," I explained. There was silence on the other end, then a frustrated sigh. "I know, but it's gone. I can't find it anywhere." Did he take it?" I hesitated, unsure how to answer. The truth was obvious to me. "Call him," I said cautiously. "I think he might have it." At first, she resisted. "No, I don't want to start a fight," she said. But eventually, she dialed his number. I heard the phone ring, felt the tension spike. Then his voice, smooth and controlled, carried through her speaker. "Hello, did you take my clothes?" she demanded. "Yeah," he admitted after a pause. "I was going to wash them. Thought it would save time for you." I could practically feel the bag in my mind, soaking wet, stiff with detergent, completely mishandled. My stomach churned. "But that's not how we do it," I said, my voice rising. "We have a system. These clothes need care before we share them." He laughed softly, almost mockingly. "Relax, I was trying to help." I felt a jolt of anger surge through me. "Help, you call taking someone's belongings without permission help?" There was a pause. "And then, you're paranoid. You're imagining things. Stop making this into a drama." My heart sank. The words stung, cutting through the thin veil of civility I had been trying to maintain. I realized, in that moment, that he didn't just dismiss my concerns, he belittled them, attacked me personally. And worse, she was caught in the middle, holding the phone, unsure how to respond. I ended the call abruptly, my chest tight, my mind racing. The apartment had become a battlefield. That bag, so trivial in the grand scheme of things, had become a symbol of everything wrong with the situation. I sat on my couch, staring at the wall, replaying the moments in my head. The way he smirked, the subtle tone in his voice. The sense of control he seemed to wield effortlessly was as though he was asserting dominion over our lives, over our friendship, over the rituals that had kept us close for 6 years. It wasn't just the bag. It was the act, the gesture, the complete disregard for boundaries. He had violated a space that had always been sacred, and the worst part, he didn't even see it as a violation. To him, it was helping. Over the next few days, tension hung in the air like smoke. Every time I visited her apartment, I noticed the little changes. The scent of laundry detergent, lingering and overwhelming, the damp stiffness of fabrics, the faint crinkle of collars improperly folded. These were small details, but to me, they screamed of disruption, of intrusion. She texted me later that evening, apologetic. "I'm sorry he upset you," she wrote. "I didn't realize he'd take things that way. I just wanted a clean dress." I wanted to reply, to explain the mix of fear, frustration, and confusion swirling inside me, but the words caught in my throat. What could I say? How could I convey the erosion of trust in a few sentences, when it felt like the foundation of our friendship was cracking before my eyes? Later, in private, I replayed the event over and over. I remembered the soft rustle of fabric, the smell of detergent so strong it made my head ache, the way he had held himself like nothing was wrong. I could almost hear his voice mocking me in my mind. Paranoid, crazy, obsessed. I started to question myself. Was I overreacting? Was this just a misunderstanding, a minor inconvenience blown out of proportion? But the nagging feeling in my gut told me otherwise. His presence wasn't benign, it was invasive. His actions weren't harmless, they were deliberate. And the worst part, my friend didn't fully see it. She wanted to believe in his good intentions, wanted to avoid conflict. I understood that. I wanted that too. But how could I reconcile her trust in him with my own growing sense of alarm? That night, I couldn't sleep. I imagined the apartment, the white bag of clothes now in his hands, and the power he seemed to wield without effort. Every fold in the sweater, every crease in the blouse, every scent of detergent felt like a mark of his intrusion, a reminder that our sanctuary had been compromised. I knew I needed to establish boundaries. I needed to confront the situation head-on. But every time I imagined the conversation, I felt the weight of it pressing down on me. His tone, his smirk, the way he seemed untouchable, it was intimidating. Still, I couldn't ignore it. The friendship, the rituals, the trust we had built over 6 years, it was worth fighting for. And so, I made a decision. The next time I visited, I would not leave anything to chance. I would reclaim the space that had always been ours, no matter how uncomfortable it became. The white bag, innocuous to anyone else, had become the symbol of a larger battle, and I was ready to fight it. I knew I couldn't keep walking on eggshells forever. The apartment that had once been our safe haven now felt like a battlefield, each corner occupied by the shadow of him. The white bag of clothes had long since become a symbol, a quiet trigger, reminding me of everything that had changed. That Saturday, I decided to visit her, fully intending to confront the situation. I brought the bag she had lent me again, carefully folded, as always. My hands shook slightly as I approached the door, a mixture of fear, anger, and determination tightening my chest. I let myself in with her spare key. The apartment smelled faintly of lavender, her usual comforting scent, but beneath it lingered the stronger, almost suffocating odor of detergent, the same scent that had haunted me since the last incident. And there he was. He stood in the living room, casually leaning against the wall, phone in hand, wearing that same unsettling smile. "Hey," he said, voice smooth, almost mocking. "Back so soon?" I set the bag down firmly. "We need to talk," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. He tilted his head, an almost playful gesture, as if he had all the time in the world. "About what?" "About boundaries," I said. "About respect. About the fact that you don't touch other people's things without permission. You've crossed the line too many times." He laughed softly. "I'm just trying to help her. You're making a mountain out of a molehill." I felt my frustration surge. Help, by taking her clothes and washing them improperly, by mocking me over the phone, by inserting yourself into every little thing we do. That's not help, it's interference. The tension between us crackled in the air, thick and heavy. He leaned forward slightly, smirk still in place, but there was a sharpness now in his eyes. "And who are you to decide what's interference? You've been imagining things this whole time." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my hands. I've known her for 6 years. 6 years of trust, rituals, and shared moments that you have no right to disrupt. And yet, here you are, treating it like it doesn't matter. He stepped closer, and I could see the faintest glint of challenge in his gaze. Maybe she wants me here. Maybe she likes having someone take care of things for her. I clenched my fists. This isn't about liking or wanting. This is about respect. This is about acknowledging boundaries. You've ignored both, repeatedly. For a tense moment, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft rustle of the curtains as the wind moved them. I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears, the adrenaline sharp and biting. Then, without warning, he smirked and leaned back, almost casual again. You know, you're lucky she hasn't seen how obsessive you are. How paranoid. Maybe she should know the truth about you. My stomach twisted. The audacity of his words, the way he twisted the narrative, made my blood boil. I realized that at this point, nothing I said would change his perception of me, and perhaps he thrived on that tension. I straightened my shoulders, voice calm but resolute. You're not going to manipulate her. You're not going to rewrite our friendship. And you're not going to make me doubt myself. I'm not going to let you do that. For a long moment, he said nothing, just studied me with that same unnerving intensity. Then he chuckled, a low, mocking sound that sent shivers down my spine. All right. Let's see how long you can keep this up. I knew he wasn't backing down. I knew he would continue to challenge, to intrude, to disrupt. But for the first time, I felt a flicker of control. I had spoken. I had set boundaries, and I had stood my ground. Even if it didn't change him, it changed my refuse to let fear dictate my actions any longer. After that confrontation, I left her apartment. The bag of clothes still in my hands, my mind racing. I realized that our friendship, once simple and comforting, had been irrevocably altered. But I also realized something else. Boundaries could be drawn, and respect could be demanded. Even if he refused to give it willingly, the next few days were tense. I checked in with her, making sure she was aware of what had happened, making sure she understood that I was not trying to cause drama, but simply protect the trust and intimacy that had always existed between us. She was thankful, yet conflicted, torn between her attachment to him and her loyalty to me. I also began to notice subtle shifts in her behavior. She was more cautious, more hesitant when discussing him. She didn't want to hurt either of us, and I understood that. But the dynamic had changed. The rituals of our friendship, the trust we had shared for 6 years, had to be rebuilt, carefully and deliberately, if it was to survive at all. The white bag remained a symbol in my mind, not just of intrusion or control, but of resilience, the fact that even in the face of someone who sought to disrupt, boundaries could be drawn, voices could be raised, and friendship could still endure by the end of part 1. I knew one thing for certain. The battle was far from over. The tension, the intrusions, the subtle manipulations, they were only the beginning. But I also knew that we were stronger than this, that our friendship had endured 6 years of laughter, tears, and shared memories. And if we could survive this, maybe, just maybe, we could survive anything. Even after the confrontation, his presence lingered like a shadow, subtle but unyielding. Every time I stepped into her apartment, I felt it immediately, the small things that were once comforting now tainted with tension. The hum of the fridge, the faint rustle of the curtains, the scent of lavender and detergent mingled with the unsettling odor of intrusion. She greeted me warmly, her smile a small island of normalcy in the storm of uncertainty. But I noticed the way her eyes darted toward the living room every few seconds, almost apologetic, as if she feared he might appear at any moment. It was subtle, but I could feel her hesitation. Her careful balance between loyalty to him and our 6-year friendship. He hadn't left. He still appeared during my visits, sometimes lingering silently, sometimes inserting himself into conversations with a casual ease that masked a deliberate control. I realized he wasn't just disrupting our routines, he was systematically destabilizing the comfort we had shared. I tried to focus on the friendship, on the rituals we had maintained for so long, but every laugh, every casual exchange carried an undercurrent of unease. I felt like an intruder in what had once been a sanctuary, and I hated it. The white bag of clothes, now returned and carefully folded, sat on the sofa. I couldn't look at it without recalling the smell of detergent, the stiffness of the fabrics, the violation of our trust. It was more than a bag, now it was a symbol, a reminder of what had changed. I decided to focus on what I could control, my own behavior, my own actions. I resolved to maintain the boundaries I had set, even if he refused to acknowledge them. But I also knew that boundaries alone might not be enough. Trust, once disrupted, required rebuilding, and it wasn't clear whether our friendship or even she was willing to go through that process. In the days that followed, I observed patterns. He would still linger, still make subtle comments, but I noticed small victories for myself. I could navigate the apartment without panic, place items where they belonged without interference, and engage in our rituals with careful, deliberate confidence. But he was adaptive. He seemed to study our interactions, learning the points where he could unsettle me most effectively. Sometimes it was a glance, a casual remark, or a lingering presence. He seemed to thrive on the tension, enjoying the disruption as if it were entertainment. She began to notice, too, though cautiously. In moments alone, she would confide in me, apologetic and uncertain. "I don't know how to handle him," she admitted one evening. "I don't want to upset him, but I also don't want to hurt you." Her honesty was comforting, yet it reminded me of the delicate balance we were maintaining. I realized that our friendship was no longer a safe space, was a negotiation, a careful dance where every move mattered. Tension escalated when he began interfering with our routines more overtly. He would move clothes from one room to another without explanation, rearrange items we had always left in specific places, and occasionally comment on our shared belongings in ways that felt invasive. One afternoon, I arrived to return a new set of items, a sweater, a scarf, a jacket. I intended to place them carefully on her bed, as we had always done. But he was there, hovering near the doorway, his presence impossible to ignore. "Hey," he said smoothly. "You're early. Need help with that?" "No," I replied firmly, trying to assert control over the situation. He smiled, that same unsettling expression, just making sure things are handled properly. You know, for her sake. It was subtle, but it carried weight. Every word, every gesture, seemed designed to assert authority, to remind me that he had influence, that he occupied the space now. The cumulative effect of these intrusions reached a breaking point one evening when a misunderstanding led to a heated confrontation. A small item, a scarf I had borrowed and returned, was missing, and I knew immediately who had it. When she called him, he denied it at first, then casually admitted taking it to make things easier for her. The frustration and fear that had been simmering erupted in me. I confronted him directly, repeating the boundaries I had set before. "You've crossed the line again," I said, voice steady but fierce. This is not help. This is not care. This is control, and I will not allow it. He smirked, undeterred. You're imagining things. She appreciates my help. You're just paranoid. I realized then that confrontation alone would never fully resolve this. But standing my ground, asserting boundaries, and refusing to allow manipulation marked a small victory. I had reclaimed some control, even if the dynamic remained tense. Weeks had passed since the last confrontation, and the tension between us had settled into a constant, uneasy rhythm. I knew I couldn't continue simply reacting. I had to act. The first step was small but deliberate. I organized the clothes I had borrowed, folding each piece meticulously, and made a mental map of where everything should be in her apartment. I wanted to establish a pattern, a system that even his presence couldn't easily disrupt. When I arrived that Thursday, she greeted me warmly, a rare smile brightening her eyes. "Thanks for coming early," she said. "I wasn't sure you'd want to be around." "I need to," I replied. "We need to keep things under control." He was in the living room, casually sprawled on the sofa. But this time, I didn't hesitate. I walked in with confidence, carefully placing each item exactly where it belonged. His eyes flicked toward me, then lingered, curious and slightly cautious. "I see you're reorganizing," he said, voice casual, but the smirk betrayed a faint irritation. "Yes," I said firmly, "because that's how we do it." It was a small victory, but it mattered. By asserting control over the physical space, I was also asserting control over the dynamic. As the weeks progressed, the tension evolved into a subtle power struggle. He continued to linger, to comment, to make small alterations, but I refused to be rattled. I began to anticipate his movements, to predict his intentions, and to counteract them before they could disrupt our routines. She noticed the change. "You're different," she said one afternoon, glancing at me while folding a blouse. "More confident, less anxious, I've realized," I replied, "that I can't let him control our space or our friendship. I have to act before it escalates further." But the more I acted, the more he resisted. Sometimes it was a glance, a comment, a minor rearrangement, but always with intent. It was clear that he thrived on the tension, on the struggle for control, and he seemed to be escalating in response to my assertiveness. One evening, the tension reached a peak. I arrived at her apartment with a bag of freshly cleaned clothes, careful and deliberate as always. He was there, leaning against the wall, phone in hand, eyes flicking toward me with a smirk. "I see you've brought the bag again," he said. "Do you want me to help?" "No," I replied firmly. "This is something I need to do myself." He stepped closer. "You think you can control everything? I don't think I know how this works, and you've crossed the line too many times." The room was silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. I felt my pulse quicken, but I didn't back down. He laughed softly. "You really think standing there and folding clothes will stop me?" "You're delusional. I don't need to stop you," I said. "I need to protect what matters, and that includes her and our friendship." For the first time, I saw a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there, and for the first time, I realized that asserting boundaries could have a real impact. Even on someone like him, the apartment was no longer a battlefield, but a contested space where rules were clear and boundaries respected. He still existed in the periphery, still made small attempts to assert control, but I had learned to anticipate and counteract every move. She and I began to rebuild our rituals, carefully reintroducing the shared habits that had once defined our friendship. We folded clothes together, laughed about small fashion choices, and gradually, cautiously, restored a sense of trust. The white bag remained a symbol not of conflict, but of resilience. Every time I handled it, I remembered the struggle, the tension, the confrontations, and the small victories. And I understood that friendship, trust, and respect could endure even the most insidious intrusions, if boundaries were asserted and voices were raised when necessary. By the time I left her apartment that night, I knew one thing: the battle wasn't over, but we had reclaimed a measure of control, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of quiet triumph. The week leading up to the confrontation was surreal. Every visit, every interaction was shadowed by a quiet anticipation, a sense that something inevitable was approaching. She and I tried to maintain normalcy, but even casual laughter felt tense, every shared smile carrying a weight that hadn't existed before. I spent hours planning my approach. It wasn't just about standing my ground anymore. It was about protecting our friendship, our shared space, and ensuring that he could no longer manipulate or disrupt the rhythm of our lives. I practiced calm tones, rehearsed firm but non-hostile language, and mentally prepared for every possible reaction. When I arrived that Thursday, the apartment felt like a powder keg. He was there, leaning against the counter, phone in hand, smirking like he had already won. "Hey," he said casually, eyes flicking to me. "Back again?" "Yes," I said steadily. "We need to talk. All of us." She looked between us, hesitation evident in her eyes. I could feel the tension radiating off her, the worry that this confrontation could fracture something she still wanted to protect. "This is important," I added. "We can't keep letting things happen this way." He laughed softly, a low sound that sent chills down my spine. "Important? What's important? Folding clothes? Organizing shoes? You really think this is a crisis?" "It's not about the clothes," I said firmly. "It's about respect, boundaries, and trust. You've crossed the line repeatedly, and it can't continue. Not now, not ever." He tilted his head, smirk widening. "And what? You think you can control me? Control our lives?" "No," I said, taking a deep breath. "But I can control what I allow. And I will not allow you to manipulate, intimidate, or disrupt our friendship any longer." The air was thick with tension. Every movement, every glance carried weight. I could feel my pulse hammering, adrenaline sharp in my veins. I had rehearsed every word, every inflection, yet the real confrontation felt infinitely more intense than anything I had imagined. He stepped closer, voice low. "You really think you're in charge here?" "Yes," I said, steady and unwavering, "because I am in control of my actions, and I refuse to let you take away what we've built for 6 years." For a long moment, silence filled the room. Even she seemed to hold her breath. Then, slowly, he leaned back, his smirk fading into something more neutral. "Fine," he said finally. "If that's how it is, then maybe it's time to step back." The shift was subtle but profound. After that confrontation, he became less intrusive, more distant, as if he understood that his usual tactics would no longer work. He still existed in the periphery, but the dynamic had changed. She and I began to rebuild, cautiously but deliberately. We reintroduced our shared routines, folding clothes together, borrowing items, laughing over small fashion quirks. But this time, boundaries were explicit, clearly communicated, and mutually respected. The white bag of clothes, once a symbol of violation and tension, became a symbol of resilience. Every time I handled it, I remembered the struggle, the confrontations, and the small victories that had ultimately protected our friendship. We also talked openly about the past. Weeks the intrusions, the fear, the subtle manipulations. She apologized for any confusion, for being caught between loyalty to him and her commitment to our friendship. I reassured her that what mattered most was our mutual trust and understanding. Now stronger for having been tested, weeks turned into months. The apartment regained its rhythm. The rituals, once disrupted, were restored, and our friendship felt stronger than ever. He remained on the periphery, occasionally visiting, but he no longer wielded the same subtle control. I realized something important. Boundaries, once clearly established, cannot be ignored. Respect, once demanded, cannot be undermined. And trust, once tested and rebuilt, can endure even the most challenging circumstances. The white bag remained a symbol not of conflict, but of what we had overcome. It represented resilience, courage, and the ability to assert oneself even in the face of manipulation and disruption. And in that overcoming, there is a quiet victory, a sense of peace and confidence that the bond of trust and respect we have built over the past 6 years is stronger than any outside intervention. We faced the storm, and we emerged intact, wiser, and more resilient. And in the end, that is true victory.